Good morning, Grace.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm really good. How are you?
I'm great, thank
Awesome.
you. Welcome and welcome to all our listeners, and thank you for your great feedback to our last episode of Can You See What I Can See? And in that one, we talked about grandparents raising their grandchildren. Vicky Scott here, and today my co-host Grace Hart and I want to talk about something that we human beings have been doing for a long time. And by that, I mean we never actually acknowledge ourselves and our
Mm,
unique gifts and talents. And we've called today's episode The Magic That We Hide from Ourselves. So, Grace, I can see a world where each of us are no longer playing small. And in turn, this leads to a world where it is actually normal for each of us to feel free to be the magic of us without that judgment from ourselves, particularly, or from others. So, what can you see?
Oh, I see that too, and I see a world where we celebrate and lift up and empower, everybody. And I see a world where there's no competition. There's just creation.
Oh, that's
Mm.
interesting. You talk about competition. I think that I realise I sort of grew up in an era where comparison with others was actually what was
Required.
commonplace.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So, and I sort of made that mean that we had to be, we couldn't just allow ourselves to be us and others to be all the magic that they are.
Yeah, for me, competition creates polarity. There's winners and there's losers. And when you're focused on the winning and the losing, are you truly creating? Are you truly in possibilities? Can you actually see everything that you could step into and be for yourself, your family, the community, the world? And so I would love competition to not exist. I would love creation to exist. And everyone's got their own abilities to create. So you're not sort of in judgment of, oh, what are you creating? Because that's that competition energy. It's like, oh, I want to create this, and this is what makes me really happy, and with me being me. And what are you creating? And how can we co-create together? That's the world I see.
Oh, wow. I love that. I
Well,
wished
I'm
I'd had
glad.
those. And I wished I'd had those sorts of conversations as a young person growing up. I know it
Me
just
too.
wasn't. Yeah, we need
Mm.
this new library, don't we, of vocabulary that keeps coming up that just hasn't been there before. And it's unfortunate that sometimes we refer to it as a bit woo-woo, but
Yeah.
what we're currently getting isn't actually working for us.
Exactly. And you actually said it in one of the podcasts. You talked about the library, and the library's there. It's fully formed, it's active, it has lots of juicy books and information in there. It's just our perception. We need to turn our head and choose something greater rather than trying to. I think people get lost in the trying to fix this reality instead of just creating a new one.
Mm. Yeah, but some of it's been around the way we've all been conditioned.
Absolutely.
I actually found this a bit confronting, but I read somewhere that the director of London School of Economics, well, he was quoted as saying that in the past, jobs were about muscles
Yeah.
and now they're about brains, but in the future, they'll be about the heart. So what do you think
You,
about that?
you know, that gives me goosebumps. In this day and age, if you're a designer and you create a design, within moments, as soon as it gets out onto the internet, you've got your copies. And I think it's the same with everything. If you put your book out there, they're going to, plagiarize it, or they're going to copy it and sell it as their own. And I mean, there's lots of things that can happen with your creations. However, nobody can create your heart and who you be with that.
Mm.
And isn't that why we go to a hairdresser? It's who they're being, or if we, love a tennis player, or who we look up to and why we look up to them. It's who they're being. And yes, they might have a great skill that, makes it exciting. Like I go and get my hair cut because they're really good. But there could be two people side by side that are equally as amazing and skilled with the hair, the haircut that you'll get. But you're going to go to the one that your heart's connected to. So that can't be duplicated. That can't be copied. It can't be copied.
Mm.
And so yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that I know that we're heading
Mm.
it. And so this is where all the people that are doing so much thinking or put a lot of emphasis on what they're doing rather than who they're being, they're gonna be confronted. They're gonna go, whoa, this is a whole new playing field. I don't know how to be vulnerable. I don't know how. I've been taught that that's all no. It's all about creating the judgment of success.
Mm. Well, you mentioned vulnerability. Dr. Brené Brown, she talks a lot about vulnerability and shame.
I love that woman.
But also, yeah, I know, I do too.
Yeah, she's one of my faves.
Oh, yes, me too. And she also talks a lot about wholeheartedness, which,
okay.
I can just tell you this really stood out for me. She described it as engaging in our lives from a place of worthiness.
Oh, wow.
It means cultivating the courage, compassion and connection to wake up in the morning and think, no matter what gets done and how much is left undone, I am enough.
Oh, gosh.
And it's going,
yeah.
I know, and it's going to bed at night thinking, yes, I am imperfect and vulnerable and sometimes afraid.
And that's what makes me beautiful.
Well, absolutely. And she finishes by just saying, and it doesn't change the truth that I am brave and worthy of love and belonging. So this love and belonging thing, and you mentioned heart. So it all comes together, I guess, about we've created such shame and vulnerability around us for generations.
Well,
that it has actually stopped us being the magic of us.
Absolutely. And shame's really interesting. I mean, when I speak to people about shame, a lot of the response I get is, oh, I don't have shame. And I'll say to them, so do you feel worthy? Do you feel valued and valuable? Do you have no negative thoughts or, disempowering thoughts? And they go, oh, no, I have those. And I said, well, that is shame. And they're, oh, wow, I thought shame was, like if someone took all your clothes off at once, you'd go, ah. And so there's a big spectrum with shame. And basically anytime you make yourself wrong, that is shame. And, as you know, Vic, I'm really passionate about domestic violence and creating change with that. And in the research, when they look at why, people perpetrate violence, there's no commonality really except shame. So, sometimes it's testosterone, sometimes, it's upbringing, etc. It might be, mental health, but there's a commonality that every single person that perpetrates violence has an extreme shame that they have just buried and they just can't even begin to look at. They've made themselves so wrong. And it's not an excuse, but it's just saying, wow, look at this. This shame's a big deal here. And we tend to shame everyone, really. Everyone's got it and everyone's touched by it. And if we were a little bit more aware of when we speak to someone, is there an element there of shame?
Yeah. And again, it's just whether the language is understood the way it's meant to be understood, isn't it? I know I made excuses growing up. I guess I've always been conscious of not wanting to stand out in a professional sense because I thought that others might think I was too big for my boots or I was being a show-off and I always sort of felt that others knew more than I did. So really, who did I think I was? And
that imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And also, I have to jump in because I know you and I know what an incredible value you are. Just standing on the street, not saying a word. Just your very essence and your being is changing the world. And of course, when you open your mouth, it's like, oh my gosh, and your kindness and caring. And I really get that anyone who feels that way that you've just described, and that was me too, I really got I had a turning point where I realized it's actually mean. It's mean and not kind for me to step up and step out and not be me. And it takes courage, and yes, there's going to be haters and judges. However, when you look at the bigger picture of what it's going to create, you playing small is an unkindness to you, your family, and the planet. So, I'm so grateful that you moved past that. Even if you have those echoes, you don't listen to them, I'm hoping. Is that true?
Well, I notice it more quickly now.
Yeah.
I still have it, but it doesn't hang around. It used to hang around for days and weeks or whatever else.
Absolutely.
Yes, but now I just think, oh, there it is again. So now I can just notice it and just not try and fight it. Just notice it, I guess, is probably works for me at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is part of the wounding, isn't it? I mean, the shame is a woundedness. And so if anything sort of triggers that woundedness, that inner voice is going to come up and play and say, you're worthless, you're hopeless, don't do it, you're a waste of space, or however it speaks to you.
Grace, I love Dr. Gabor Mate and his
Yes,
work
me
around.
too.
Do you?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I saw a movie that he was in. Somebody else had made the movie, but they called it The Wisdom of Trauma because they're saying we all have trauma and there is wisdom in that trauma. But one of the
Yes.
things, and he says, most of us have suffered it at different levels, but it continues to affect our choices into adulthood. Do you think that the impact of trauma and its unresolved impacts have anything to do with allowing ourselves to be the magic that we all are?
Everything to do with it. I
Do
remember
you?
Oprah said, turn your wounds to wisdom, and that's very much what you're talking about and what, he's talking about. And yeah, I mean, with my domestic violence podcast, I speak about being the flower, and when you're in the center of the flower, you're in your beingness. And the petals are your inner community, and some of your inner community are disenfranchised, hurt, wounded experiences, and they have an energetics of their own, and they can hijack you. So absolutely, for me, I love how you say it. I agree wholeheartedly. Every single person on this planet has trauma, has mental health issues. Everyone. And it's just a huge spectrum. Some people have it 24/7. Some only get triggered with certain things. Some have managed it better. Some, they, like my daughter, I said to her, I wish everyone could just be like you. She's amazing. And, she's been brought up in a way with all these questions, and she doesn't have that. And I'm in the middle of writing a book, and I said, that voice that and she goes, what voice? And I said, no, the voice that tells you you're not good, And she goes, Mum, I don't actually have that voice. And I said, I said, hang on a minute, we need to have this conversation. And I said, it's not like you hear it and then you just don't do anything. She goes, Mum, I don't hear it. I don't have that. And I said, well, what do you have? Because I just assumed that she would have it, but have the tools to be okay with it, And she says, no, I just have a voice of awareness. And she gave the example, like she takes our dog for a walk, and she says sometimes I'll want to go for a walk, but when I actually just go, oh, hang on, what would it create if I went for the walk? It's kind of heavy, and it's kind of weird, and so I know, okay, not meant to go. But it's not a voice like, oh, if you go for a walk, or you're hopeless, or you should go for. She goes, I don't have that voice, and so I was so excited. I was like, oh my God, this is the world I see, and so this is the world I see where we don't have to deal with this. But right now we're dealing with a lot of people who we need to have this conversation. We need to look at our petals. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I'm in my late 60s, and I know my dear mum which this part I found really interesting in this movie as well, The Wisdom of Trauma. Dr. Mate was talking about how cancer can be triggered by that unresolved hurt and trauma.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so when I noticed it in my mum, who was a fantastic human being, but didn't believe she was. And so then I grew up with all this thing about thinking it was my job to raise my kids in a certain way. And I'd been indoctrinated, by everything. And I know my son used to say to me, but Mum, what if I'm just here to have fun? And I used to see that as, that's, oh my God, that's irresponsible.
That's not right.
It's not right. And what does that mean? That you're going to live off other people while you just have fun? I imagined him just wanting to buy great cars and, poon around the world, basically.
Well, you would have had your point of view on what fun is for you, and it might be a completely different thing for him. Yeah.
Well, as I know now, it is. And now that I can connect more dots, it is actually him being the magic of him. He's not meant to be like our generation. He's meant to be just himself. And that goes for all of us, doesn't it?
Well, that's the gift. When someone can be all of who they be, that's the gift. That's why we're made how we're made. Like, as you know, my spelling is shocking. I've got terrible dyslexia. And I could really be down on myself, but obviously, my creator didn't want me to, become an editor or be a secretary, God forbid, don't hire me for that. And however, I have an enthusiasm and I have, because of my inability to write well, and I mean like handwrite well, therefore now I speak better, if that makes sense. So it's, if we allow each other to just find our knowing and actually come from that and be that. And for me, the gift of laughter heals. Laughter gets you through the most horrible things. And this person that you speak about, oh my goodness, to have that on the planet, to have joy on the planet. And, I remember in one of the books I read, this gentleman talked about he can tell within seconds if a couple's going to make it or not, or, have a really good chance of making it. And I can't remember the three things he said, but one of them was that ability to just have joy no matter what. That sort of,
wow.
he talked about it as actually, maybe we can look at it next week. I'll put my thinking cap on and work out who said that and what that was, because it's definitely worth investigating. But it's like you can travel through the hard times, the ups and downs of a relationship if you've got that kindness and caring and that generosity. I think he spoke about that. It was generosity of spirit, actually. Yeah, joy and generosity of spirit, I think it was. Yeah,
yes.
yeah, absolutely.
Gosh, we sure do need more of that around, don't we? Perhaps I think this one is such a big one. I'm sure there's going to be
huge
other.
topic.
I know. So there'll be other parts of it that I think we can explore in another podcast. But one of the things too and I love this. I did a photo book for my kids for their 40th birthdays, and there was a quote that I'd seen not long before it, and it really, to me, it was like freeing them up to live their life. And it goes like this: you are not your mother, your father, your history, or your cultural influence. You are uniquely and originally you. Be bold and daring and fearless and unconventional. Be willing to use your voice in service to your soul. Go on, rock that damn boat. The wave you create might just change the world.
I love that. Yeah, it reminds me of a song, Indira, by Indira. I'll put it on the podcast information. It's beautiful. It speaks to that energy.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. Yeah. She goes into all the things that I'm not. I am not but I've got it in my head, but I just can't remember the name of it. But it's a beautiful song. It is a beautiful song, all about just being you. You're not your past. You're not the judgments that others have of you. You are unique. You are beautiful. You are worth it. You are valuable. And if you don't feel that way, chances are it's because you're functioning from a petal and not from the middle of the flower, your beingness.
I do love that. And once we know that any time we don't feel really at peace within, then it's probably a good indicator that we are functioning from a petal.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you can't acknowledge or won't acknowledge your greatness, you can't really be that contribution and step into it. And I think that, with other people, when they put these judgments on you, they're doing the best they can. You talk about as a parent, oh gosh, I've learnt that now, oops, and please, guilt's another thing with shame. And you know it when you know it, you get it when you get it. And, please don't make yourself wrong, or anyone listening make yourself wrong. It's just, what can you create now? What can you choose now? And sometimes it can be having those vulnerable conversations that we're not taught. We're not taught to speak that way. And in fact, we're taught to Twitter it out, or, break up via text, or, send the email instead of actually having that conversation.
Conversations face to face are getting more rare these days, aren't they?
Yeah. And, and you miss so much with that, just seeing, for example, I was helping a gentleman. He's got a new job, and these two owners, they were yelling at each other, like screaming at each other. And so this person said, I don't want to work there anymore, and he said, I'm just going to send a text saying that, because it was a casual job, I'm just going to send a text saying, look, it's not working for me. And I said, okay, you could choose that, but let's look at what that's going to create for you, for them. And so you do have to read the room. It's no point having a conversation with a psychopath or having a conversation where you've already got the awareness they're not willing to hear what you're going to say or not open to what you're going to say. But generally speaking, no matter what, unless of course there's a risk of harm, etc., it's always better face to face, because you can see that. For example, I said if they're yelling, there's something wrong, and so if you said, "Hey guys, are you okay? I've just noticed you've been yelling at each other a lot lately. Can I help with anything?" And of course, that's a completely different thing than resisting and reacting or quitting or separating. Separating is one that we could have a whole podcast just on separation. How when we don't like something, it's like, let's just separate, instead of going, hang on a minute, let's have this conversation. Yeah.
Actually, we're not just talking about marriages there, are we?
No,
How
everything.
often do we do that? Yes, in a workplace, we'll just avoid, or we'll, I want to do one on that. We will do that again.
On the list.
It's on the list, yes. Well, Grace, thank you very much for sharing that. Have you got, just before we maybe go into some home play, what would you say about that? I know you said about, are you okay? But sometimes in a workplace even, there's there are tough conversations. Well, they're there to be had, but often they're avoided. But what have you got to tell some people about how to approach them? What's a better way of doing it rather than just avoiding it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, people go into what's right and wrong and good and bad, and they go into a conversation on not really listening. They go into a conversation on, I want you to get why I'm feeling this way and that I'm right. And generally speaking, the other person feels the same way. And so I always say, can we just put aside the right and the wrong and the good and the bad and look at what we can generate and create? So firstly, I'd be speaking to that person and asking them questions like, is it actually right for you to keep working for this company? Can they actually receive you? Are you better off somewhere else? So there's lots of things before that conversation even happens that I'd probably get into. But if we were just to jump into the questioning, I would listen. I would just say, hey, how do you, what's your awareness about this? Or, I noticed this is happening. What do you reckon's going on? And then just shut up. I would just listen. I would just listen. And then, if I was in a position of that they were my employee, I would probably, if I've noticed a change in them, I'd probably say, hey, how you going? Like I wouldn't even bring up, whether their sales were down or whatever it was. I'll just say, hey, how you going? And then I'd hear, but you've got to, we've talked about this, Vic, about safety, security, and support. It's my what I get up on my soapbox for. It's like if you have created a business, or if your partner doesn't feel safe, secure, and supported, if your children don't feel safe, secure, and supported, you're never going to be able to have these vulnerable conversations. You're always going to, you might start it, but it takes two. It takes two to be able to be that space of vulnerability.
Yeah, and I guess that's where you've often said we do need a trauma-informed society in our schools.
Absolutely, across the board.
Yes,
yeah. And really caring about people. You can't, this is the thing that I find, funny, not funny, but when you work for somebody, it's like you cut off all other parts of yourself and then you just come in and you do your job, and the boss doesn't want to know about anything else. But you can't do that, because that they're a human being, and if they've just lost a child, or they're going through a breakup, or someone they care about is going through a hard time, or even just COVID and their mortgages and their fear and this dripping of trauma, all of this is going to affect the bottom line as an employee, right? And so I think that it's insane not to have these conversations on, are you okay? How are you? What do you require to feel safe, secure, and supported? I've got a girlfriend who works for a bank, and she's on the spectrum. And she said to her boss, after we had that first lockdown, her productivity went through the roof. And the boss noticed it. She noticed it. So now she just works from home. And, so we've got to be willing to look at, do we want this employee? Yes, we do. Okay, what conditions can we create together so I can get the best of you and you can feel just so amazing and cared for and loved and honoured and appreciated? And then they're going to work so much harder for you anyway.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and imagine what the world that would create when everyone's happy doing what they're doing.
Yeah, and and of course those that are in partnered with other people intimately, it's like, wow, imagine if you felt safe, secure, and supported, and encouraged to be you, and it's okay if you made a mistake. I've got a very dear girlfriend of mine, and I just adore our friendship because I can be anything with her. I can mess up. I can, and if I mess up, I'll just say, I'm so sorry. That was not okay. And how can I make up for it? I know that I'm not going to be abused back. She's going to get that if I do anything that's not okay, I wouldn't have meant it. And so this is where I would just love, but as you say, it's across the board. Our governments don't feel safe to legislate because they're going to think they're going to get booted out. The individual members of parliament are frightened because they don't want to put their head above, that tall poppy thing because they want to keep their job. And then there's these brave members, or for example, Jacinta Ardern, the New Zealand leader. I'm so proud of her. She's just making some really good choices, and I think we're going to see it more and more, that there's a strength in vulnerability. There is a wisdom in the wounds, and we all know it when someone's willing to be authentic. We can tell with our leaders whether someone's doing something because it's just going to get votes or whether they genuinely are say sorry for something. You were part of the walk across the Sydney Harbour Bridge, right, to say sorry. And that was felt. That wasn't, yes, okay, it might be politically great and do good things politically, but there was an energetic of truth there and authenticity. And then that's when the Australian people responded.
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't to say sorry. It was about creating that different conversation, really.
See, thank you.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, it has never been had. But I didn't get it. I remember reading some years later, I read this story about this woman who had been removed as a child, and she was suffering terrible trauma intergenerationally. She's now a grandmother, and she said she really wanted to go to Sydney, I think from Wollongong. So she got the train up to Sydney on the morning of it, and she was hurting like heck inside and wanted to cry and everything. And then she said when she got onto the bridge and saw sorry written in the sky by a plane, and she just burst into tears, and she said that was when her healing within began. And I just thought, oh, my gosh, you never know the difference you make as an individual, because that was never part of our planning when we did that.
But it created that, right? It created the environment for people to say, what can I do?
Exactly, because I don't even know who did it. It was
That's
somebody,
right.
Just an individual just doing that. So I just, oh, wow. No, I so get it. Well, what do you think about how can we practice or do something that helps us get the magic of being all of us? What can we do this week?
Well, before we just get into home play, I did want to speak about In an Unspoken Voice with Peter Levine or Levine.
Oh, yes.
And I just wanted to make reference to what you said about the pain in the body. And his work is all about the somatic, and that, dis-ease and disease can come from trauma. So I just wanted to highlight that. It's a brilliant book, and he's a great author as well. But for home play, what do you think we should do?
Well, I don't know. What if we were just to notice what we do throughout the day, whether we're actually being all of us or whether
when we're in polarity or not.
Yeah, whether we think we're just playing a role that somebody else expects of us, or we think they do.
Yeah, are we on autopilot? Rather than rather than creation. And a good way to assess that is the polarity. If you're going into the right and the wrong, then you're not in creation. So anytime.
So what do you mean the right and wrong? Yeah.
Well, let's say, a couple are fighting and, he did this or she did that. If you're doing the, speaking to your girlfriends or your mates about the problem and you're going, oh, she just keeps doing this or he keeps doing that, that's making them wrong and you right. And then if you flipped it, she or he would have their own things about the other partner that are wrong and right, right? So when you're in that polarity of good, bad, right, wrong, in talking about the quote-unquote problem, you're not in creation. So you acknowledge what the issue is. Like, I'm just going to pick something random, like they leave, wet towels on the floor when they get out of the shower, okay? So it's like, oh, why can't they just pick that up? So they're wrong for putting it down, right? And not putting it up. And so you could actually go, first question, are they actually capable? Do they have the energy to do this? And you'd get the answer energetically. And if they can't, there's no point in having the conversation. Then it's about you actually being okay with what is or not being okay with what is. And that's where, you know, if you go into a relationship, I'm using this example because it was brought up by a client, and she had a really great relationship, and this was literally the only thing. And it was not just an okay relationship, it was great. And when she actually looked at it on, he's not, with the energy that he's got, he's just not capable of it right now. What do you do with that? And so she just went, you know what? I'm going to cut him some slack. He is the most beautiful man. He loves me beautifully. He looks after the family and the children beautifully. He's always there for us. He's funny. She went through all of that, and she said, you know what? Okay, it takes me 2 seconds to pick up the towel. I'm going to do that. With all he gives to me, I'm going to do this one act for him and get over myself. And the funny thing is, she was waiting for the towel to be dropped so she could do that because she was so excited because she had had a total reframe, and he never put it up. He never dropped it again. And she's like, how is that even possible? I never spoke to him about it again. And I said, you changed the energy and you changed your life. So sometimes that can happen, but other times it is about recognizing this can't change, but I'm okay doing it. I've changed it from a necessity to a choice. I'm going to choose to pick up the wet towel and not make it wrong.
Oh, I like that. Gosh. Well, you've left me on a great note now, so thank you very much for that.
No worries.
I love it. And well, thank you for showing me what you can see, because I couldn't see that before. And I look forward to hearing what our other listeners can see that you and I can't see.
Absolutely. And, just our conversation today, there was so much that you said. I'm like, oh, yes, no, I didn't see that. Okay. And that's the beauty, isn't it? When someone else sees it, it becomes on the supermarket shelf for you to choose too, which is wonderful. Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
All right.
Okay. Well, thanks to all the listeners, and we'll see you next week.
Absolutely. We'll catch you next week. Have a beautiful week, and let us know how you're going with the home play. Take care. Bye-bye.